When Canadian Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire commanded United Nations forces during the genocide in Rwanda, few beyond the military were aware of the severe psychological damage that witnessing such moral atrocities can cause. Dallaire's revelation that he suffered from PTSD and moral injury in the Rwandan conflict helped destigmatize these potentially devastating mental conditions among military veterans. It also helped us understand how all of us can experience moral injury in our daily lives. As we live through the aftershocks of a global pandemic, racial injustice, and the rise of extremist violence around the world, there's no better time to have a conversation about trauma, recovery, and moral courage. How do we build resilience, collective hope? How can we embrace humanity and human connection? Join the conversation as we work together to build upon General Dallaire's call for transformative change and an engaged approach to leadership in the face of moral dilemmas.
Hello and welcome or welcome back. I hope that you have enjoyed the previous webinars. My name is Dr. Eric Vermetten. I'm a psychiatrist and a professor at Leiden University in the Netherlands and a military officer in the Dutch Armed Forces. I'm now joined, as for the previous sessions, by my co-host, Dr. Suzette Brimo-Phillips, an occupational therapist and associate professor at the University of Alberta. Hello, Suzette. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Eric. Great to see you again.
Great to see you again. What time is it there?
It is 11:35 in the morning.
In Alberta, Canada. It is 7:35 here in the Netherlands. So, dear audience, it is our great pleasure again to welcome you to this time the 7th of the Cleveringa Dallaire Critical Conversation Sessions. We were pleased with the overwhelmingly positive reviews of the first 6. And we're again so excited that people from so many different countries and walks of life have joined us for today's webinar, Re-envisioning Leadership. And as I did for the previous sessions, I'll call on the countries that are represented: Australia, Belgium, Belize, Brazil, Cameroon, Canada, Colombia, Cote d'Ivoire, Finland, Germany, Guatemala, Italy, Japan, Kenya, Mexico, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Spain, Sweden, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States. Welcome to you all for this webinar of today. Now, this webinar is the 7th of 8 conversations honoring the Cleveringa Chair that was awarded to General Romeo Dallaire in November 2020. Now, born in the Netherlands, General Dallaire is a celebrated Canadian who has exemplified moral courage, the key focus of the Cleveringa Professorship.
During this series, General Dallaire and esteemed colleagues will reflect with us on issues related to complex, ambiguous moral and ethical dilemmas. These times overshadowed by issues associated with the global pandemic, climate change, gender-based violence, racialization, and threats of terror are a call for truth and reconciliation. They also highlight the need for engaged leaders who embrace humanity and can truly inspire and actualize transformative culture change. This series aims to provide a context for such a conversation. Eric?
Now, before we start today's session on re-envisioning leadership, we'd like to note a few things. So General Dallaire's experience is really the thread that weaves all these sessions together. The conversations will often come back to the themes of his experience or experiences. We're grateful that General Dallaire has joined us for the majority of these sessions, which will continue through November the 10th in the honor of Remembrance Day. Regrettably, we just heard today that the General and Marie Claude, due to unanticipated circumstances, are unable to join us today. They sent us their regards and regrets. Now, each session, and we're just started, is 90 minutes long. And when you registered, you received a live stream link on this specific session. If you wanted to visit and attend the last session, you have to register for that separate event. Please share the event with colleagues and friends and post them on social media if you like.
We're also very aware that some of the content of the conversations may be difficult to hear or trigger past experiences and memories. We encourage you to honor you and your experience and seek local supports and services if needed. We'd also love to hear your questions and comments. You can share your thoughts by using the questions or remarks box on the Leiden events page. We'll do our best to address questions that are posted. And finally, the sessions will be recorded and made available following the event on the Leiden University events page. Before we start, we're going to take a moment for a land acknowledgement.
Hello, I am Tammy Hopper, Interim Dean of the Faculty of Rehabilitation Medicine, home to Highmark at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. When we acknowledge territory, such as we do at the beginning of a meeting like this one, it is a small but important act of reconciliation. And thus, on this day, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on the traditional territory of Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, and Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe nations, lands that are now known as part of Treaties 6, 7, and 8, and homeland of the Métis. The University of Alberta respects the sovereignty, lands, histories, languages, knowledge systems, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations. Thank you for listening and joining me in this moment of reflection.
So we look forward today to engaging with the panelists that we have been able to invite for you today. We've got a great team of panelists and a great moderator. And the topics are about leadership, and the conversation will be moderated by Dr. Lorraine Smith McDonald. And she is a postdoctoral fellow with the University of Alberta Heroes in Mind Advocacy and Research Consortium, and clinician, scientist with expertise in mental health, trauma, and spirituality. Now, it's a wonderful set of panelists. 3 are from Canada, 1 from the Netherlands, and 1 from Kenya. And dear Lorraine, please offer your introductory remarks, and you may introduce the speakers.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's so wonderful to be here, and it's my esteemed pleasure and honor to be on this very important Dallaire conversation on re-envisioning leadership. And I'm absolutely joined by an accomplished group of panelists that I look forward to being able to moderate this conversation. So to begin, I'd just like to ask each of them to very quickly introduce themselves, so their name, where they're located, and their work. And Ms. Van Epperen, would you like to begin us, please? So Roxanne, would you like to introduce yourself to the team?
Yes, well, so good to be here. For me, it's evening, so tonight for me, and good day to everybody in other time zones. My name is Roxanne van Epperen, and I am located in the Netherlands, just like Eric. I'm a lawyer turned investigative journalist and author, and I have a special interest in genocide, power dynamics between the private and the public sector, and victim complicity, which is new for some people, which is basically a very smart way for malicious leaders to make a minority responsible for their own destruction. So we see it in racist structures. We saw it in the Jewish persecution in the Second World War. I've written several books. My last one's about Jewish resistance against the Nazis, and one about the Rwandan genocide and group mechanisms. I look very much forward to this evening and the conversation with James and Chelsea, Lorraine, Suzette, Eric, and I really hope there are some questions at the end of this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Roxanne. And Dr. Jones, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Chelsea Jones. I'm an occupational therapist working in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I work with military members and veterans who have been affected by workplace trauma. I'm also a postdoc fellow at Leiden University, and I am also a professional photographer, and I do a lot of work looking at diversity and inclusion in the photography industry here in Canada.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Mr. Maher, would you like to introduce yourself and go next, please?
Thank you so much, Lorraine. So my name is James Madier. I'm calling in from East Africa. It's around 8:30 right now here in the evening. It's a pleasure to be involved in this critical conversation series, particularly on re-envisioning leadership. My line of work is in humanitarianism as well as development field. I run an organization called Rainmaker Enterprise out of Toronto. I'm just here in East Africa mainly for family as well as for due to pandemic that happened while I was here and I got caught while I was with family. So I just decided to be here for now. But my home base is actually Toronto. So for the Canadians, I'm actually based in Canada.
Thank you, James.
Mostly, yeah, so I really look forward to this conversation and to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, James, for calling in. It's so late this evening. And finally, Dr. Bramo Phillips, could you finish the introductions for us, please?
I'd be happy to, and thank you. A privilege to truly join everyone on the panel and in the conversation. I'm Suzette Bramo Phillips. I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Alberta and an occupational therapist by background. I'm also have the privilege of directing the Heroes in Mind Advocacy and Research Consortium that does research on behalf of military members, veterans, public safety personnel, and their families in support of them, those who serve us, and look forward to discussing leadership. Have had an opportunity to explore leadership through much of my career as a practicing occupational therapist, predominantly in the areas of complex mental health needs and trauma-informed care practices with a variety of different populations. So looking forward to seeing how we can intersect re-envisioning leadership and discussing together. So thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you so much to everyone. So before we have the panelists share their opening remarks, if I may, I'd like to provide a few brief reflections just to set the stage about this conversation on re-envisioning leadership. I know this is a large and difficult topic, and so I'd just like to offer a few anchor points about how we're going to try and engage in this conversation. So the questions that we're going to try and tackle today are, one, what does a leader look like? How do you know when you see or find a leader? Number two, how and why does leadership fail? What things get in the way of successful leaders? And number three, what does it look like to model or mentor to bystanders? Second, I'd just like to read a small description of leadership that I actually have taped on my desk. I acknowledge that I'm not sure who wrote this, but I feel this description of leadership is very relevant to the ideas we're going to be touching on today. And so to quote, it says, leadership requires understanding to the threats of life today. A leader must stay informed. They cannot be naive, ignorant, sheltered by uninformed persons, or have the wrong priorities. Leadership also requires prudence, to know what practical action is possible in a given situation, what is impossible, and the difference between the impossible and the merely difficult. Leadership demands courage to do what is right despite opposition, mockery, and persecution. It is not always easy to buck your peers or today's trends, or what is politically correct but morally wrong. It is always a temptation to try and stay in the popularity polls or to be liked. Moreover, it is easy to stay in front of a movement that has its own momentum and direction, but real leadership means helping to make a movement come back on track, unmasking or forsaking false ideologies, and falling away to a meaningful life. In the worldly world we have today, people often ridicule such values as fidelity, permanent commitment, dying to self, care of the poor and the vulnerable. A real leader is also not exempt from fear, anxiety, stress, moments of doubt, suffering, and a terrible sense of loneliness. These are the very human emotions that go with the territory of being a leader. A true leader also does not wait until the mood or climate is right, because life and death issues are at stake. They achieve all that is possible in the present situation, knowing today's victories will bring new possibilities. Most importantly, leaders develop strength of character through many smaller acts of courage in the face of difficulties, despair, and apparent defeat. What I'd like to highlight from this quote is really this idea of leadership versus leaders. Put another way, what has always struck me about this quote is the idea that good leadership is only possible with good leaders. And more, I'd like to reflect on a couple of key words from that quote, and really this idea of character and the virtues of prudence, also known as wisdom and courage. Beginning with the idea of character, I'd just like to say a few things. The first is that it contains 4 major elements. The first is that character is a composition of personalities. It's also the capacities of the self, an exercise of good judgment, and last but not least, the display of moral development. Simply, character traits like help us to lead and move forward in the way that we think, feel, and act in certain ways. And we act and feel and think in certain ways that are congruent. Moreover, it's been broadly recognized that there's 2 types of character traits, one that have to deal with morality and those that don't. And more importantly, in Western societies, there's been a focus on those traits that are not morally rooted, not necessarily bad. So for example, being funny or creative, intelligent or free-spirited, and so on. But this has caused some challenges for us. And so in a recent review of business leader traits, it was found that most companies and institutions only screen for non-moral character traits, and therefore completely ignored those that are related to morality, such as courage, truthfulness, prudence, integrity, loyalty, authenticity, and compassion. As a result, many businesses have been noted to have incredibly hardworking, creative, and funny employees who are also highly immoral. And we've seen this reality in the banking collapse of 2008 and in many other corporate and even political scandals. So building on this, the question then becomes, how do we teach or make leaders? How do we make sure that our leaders are prudent and wise and also courageous? Before taking up too much time, I just want to mention a couple of important points. First, going all the way back to the Greek and Roman philosophers, there was this important idea by Aristotle who believed that in order to create good leaders need to have good societies. And most importantly, those good societies have to require good practices. So what Aristotle would point to is that we must be conscious about our choices and decisions, and that each choice needs to be a reasoned decision that moves us towards the good, to the ultimate end. And that virtues, these things, these moral goods that we all long for, is what we do habitually. And that the most important thing is to recognize that good leaders are not magical or sort of pop out of like mushrooms, but they're rather formed. And so put simply, morally virtuous character traits are developed through repeated practices and through the support of good family, friends, and society. As the Roman senator and orator Cicero once stated, it's not by muscle, speed, or physical dexterity that great things are achieved, but rather by reflection, force of character, and wise judgment. And so what I'd like to propose then, and as the panelists will do a better job of speaking towards, is that we need to remember that we need both courage and wisdom to go hand in hand. And the great leaders are built on these. How often in the modern world have we seen leaders who maybe don't know what to do, but engage in frenetic activity that comes with outcomes we just didn't expect? Or worse, they know what to do, but don't do it anyways. Also, we'd like to propose, and I'll leave it to the panelists to speak more about this, that great moral wisdom and courage should not be seen in terms of a Superman or a Nietzschean Uberman ideal, because this too is a problem. Too much of the focus, as the panelists will argue, has been given over to these superhero ideals that fail to recognize our need to repeatedly do what is good to develop and learn moral character. And more importantly, that we are all morally responsible. We cannot look to the few, and that we also cannot ignore our human frailty and the ability to fall and fail. And so on that note, I wish to hand it over to our speakers. And Roxanne, would you like to begin with some opening remarks for yourself?
Thank you, Lorraine, for that wise opening statement. Taking notes here. Well, I think for me and the field of investigation that I focus on is not so much on the person of the leader or, well, the ego that we sometimes tend to look for in leaders, but I think much more how to engage the bystanders and how to create the circumstances and the conditions for other people to actually be part of that leadership. So you never have like one person to focus on you. I focus primarily on the circumstances and the bystanders. And for me, for tonight at least, because it's a very complex subject, I would like to pick out 3 topics that are important to me, which for me in leadership is making sure there is accountability. Secondly, making sure that group loyalty never turns in a solidified atmosphere. So it's never ironclad, because as soon as group loyalty is solidified, there is no room for self-correction anymore. And the third one is otherization, which basically means that within the group, there is no room for identification with other people that are outside of the group. So otherization actually meaning you see people outside of the group as your enemy. So, and if I can shortly elaborate on those 3, then we see, for instance, in countries or corporations, you look at accountability, or nations after genocide or after war or conflict, that there is a huge difference in how they deal with that injustice. And if you look at the more healthy places that come out of injustice, it's the ones that they make sure there is accountability. So you see that there's a better quality of democracy if, for instance, a dictatorship chooses to deal with the perpetrators afterwards. Like we saw, for instance, in Brazil's military leadership, that after the dictatorship, they prevented persecution of its leaders by passing an amnesty law. Spain did the same under Franco. Well, you have several examples of countries that actually said, okay, we will take back the exiled people and all perpetrators will go free. And you see that with that lack of accountability, that no healthy democracy can thrive, whether it be inside a corporation, an NGO, or a nation. Secondly, what I said about creating the right climate for self-correction, that is making sure you have to invest in the conditions to make sure that group loyalty is never, well, like I said, it's never ironclad. So within the Gymnastics Federation, we saw, for instance, that a lot of specifically girls, that they said there is abuse within the Gymnastics Federation. There were reports of child abuse, but everybody within the federation swept it under the carpets for years, and everybody joined in that. So administrators, coaches, a lot of people did not dare to speak up. So there was not a climate for self-correction because the loyalty to the group was absolute. We had a rabbi in the Netherlands that once said, most Dutch people weren't very wrong during the war, but they weren't very right either. And to get the masses moving in a certain direction, you have to create the right climate. So that was my second point. And my third point, make sure there is always a sense of identification with people outside of the group. So, well, of course, we saw it here in the Netherlands during the Second World War, where you gradually saw that the Dutch Jewish population were seen as others. We see it in genocide. We also saw it with the financial crisis, that the main actors, they lost a sense of the victims of the financial crisis actually being human beings, not just puppets with a mortgage, but actually human beings with a family that could lose their house and could end up on the street. So I think a leader should invest in those 3 circumstances to always be present in the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. I look forward to coming back to those very important points. I'm now going to invite Chelsea for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Lorraine. And thanks, Roxanne, for setting the stage, and also for Lorraine for sharing her wisdom there on the topic of re-envisioning leadership. Myself, I want to be a leader. I think I've always wanted to be a leader. And when I say leader, I think of a person who brings together and leads a charge to make the world a better place. So Lorraine spoke to some of the Greek and Romans of our past that envisioned leadership and change and virtue. And I'd like to share some of the historic leaders that I've been inspired by myself. Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles, Optimus Prime, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, the X-Men. My favorite was Rogue because she was one of the only women superheroes that had curly hair like me, and the Red Power Ranger. You thought I was going to talk about a bunch of dead presidents and prime ministers, didn't you? Yeah. No, when I think about who fights for the virtue and for the greater good, I think about who I was exposed to in my childhood, who were heroes and leaders. These heroes are strong, they're brave, they're often decorated in red, white, and blue. They're ambitious, they're self-sacrificing, they have great physiques, and they're confident. And in some of these cases, they're literally superhuman. So as kids, at least in North America, I felt that I was taught that these were the qualities everybody should aspire to. And honestly, I think back to my childhood and I don't remember being taught about real historic leaders, never mind ones I could see myself in that were a woman or had curly hair. Popular culture is how I learned what a leader was. And I think that a lot of people can definitely relate to that. Traditional hero and leader qualities are based on an archetype of Christian white men. And this makes sense when you think about how other genders and minoritized communities have only relatively recently been allowed to enter corporate and academic workforces. So this has shaped our view of what characteristics and what qualities a leader should have. And we see now in popular culture, we have some great heroines or women leaders and heroes that are coming up. But even a lot of those heroes, so Mulan, Merida, Wonder Woman, Elsa, the Powerpuff Girls, they have these traditionally more masculine qualities. And in fact, these qualities are what set them apart from other women in their cohorts. So those qualities, the traditionally masculine qualities from the other leaders I talked about, are what are allowed these heroines to rise to the top and be superior to their other counterparts who have more traditional feminine qualities. And interestingly, sometimes those traditionally feminine qualities end up being the downfall that gets our heroine into trouble. She falls in love with a man, or she wasn't as assertive as she should have been. And often it's a male counterpart that ends up saving the day anyways. So until very recently, it was also incredibly rare to see leaders and heroes in popular North American and Western culture that represented ethnic minorities. And in fact, there was some tropes, and minority characters often ended up as sidekicks in fictional narratives in film, books, and television. So this messaging of what a good leader is, what a hero is, presented through pop culture at a very young age, continues to be present as we grow and move through systems, organizations, and industry. So as someone who still wishes to be a leader, and I don't know if I have some of those traditional leadership qualities, I ask myself some questions. Is a hero a leader? Are those interchangeable words? Does a leader have to have traditional hero qualities? And really, Lorraine, what is virtue anyways? And engaging with the past Dallaire critical conversations, I think it's important to ask the question of what is the greater good? It turns out these are big, complicated questions that require reflection regarding ethical and moral decision-making. And I think there's also been a bit of a reckoning too with heroes and leaders of the past history. So Christopher Columbus, we're starting to evaluate, is he a hero? Is he a leader? Looking at John A. Macdonald, Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, some of those dead presidents that are generally revered, we're also starting to see the complexities of their lives and questioning some of the choices and things they did and whether that was moral and ethical. So in 2011, Deloitte published a report examining the business case for diversity, and they summarized a number of studies on diversity in business And building on what Roxanne was speaking to, diversity is the end game, and demographic diversity is a visible lead indicator for companies seeing improved sales, better ideas, and more innovation. Diversity reduces conformity, and Roxanne talked to how that conformity can be a really dangerous thing. 2007 study found that teams comprised of people with diverse perspectives in their views, when they were included, the team's collective intelligence was greater than a team whose individual members were considered especially smart or intelligent. And I know that the word intelligent is complex and problematic as well. But when you have diversity, there's less of a vacuum. They found that problem solving, decision making was increased with a diverse group, and also communication patterns and thinking outside the box was increased as well. And this has been reiterated in another number of studies by IBM, Credit Suisse Research Institutes in 2012, and the case for diversity being a great business choice from not only a moral and ethical perspective, but also a business perspective is pretty solid. So the corporate research seems to support that the deviation from conformity and embracing diverse qualities in our workforce is key to success. And I think that's also applies to leadership. So is our lens for who we seek as leaders too narrow? Maybe. We can be leaders in our families, our communities, and our workforces, whether we're in the sectors of the corporate world, education, healthcare, not-for-profit, and many others. And to foster innovation and progress, we as a society might need to redefine what leadership is and recognize that the traditional hero qualities are not the only ones that make a good leader. Diverse experiences and knowledge and a supportive environment that encourages collaboration is a priority, and that's where the next leaders and the youth of tomorrow can flourish and develop the skills that they need to take on leadership positions. It's also really important to have diversity in leadership because the next generation of leaders needs to see themselves as a leader and aspire to make change. Rogue, that X-Men character that was my favorite growing up with the curly hair, she's actually one of the most self-destructive X-Men and maybe not the best role model. And yet, because that's the one I saw myself in as a kid, that's the one I wanted to be like. She looked a bit like me. So we need people who other people can see themselves in. And role modeling is absolutely critical for facilitating future leaders and innovation in all these different sectors. So I challenge you to ask yourself, how can society re-envision the view of what leaders are? How can we create a space for more diversity in our leadership? And how can we make workplaces more equitable and accessible for all to foster talent and our future leaders? So after some reflection and thinking about popular culture and what I was exposed to, I found a new leader to aspire to. I want to be Winnie the Pooh, maybe with pants, but I think Winnie the Pooh is who I aspire to as a leader. And Winnie the Pooh is a book by A.A. Milne that has had international distribution. And of course, then Disney co-opted it and made some great cartoons as well. So I'll expand a little bit on why I think Winnie the Pooh is a great leader. He has a quiet confidence and leads with kindness while honoring his own needs and wants. He's mindful. He likes honey and he likes relaxing. He says, don't underestimate the value of doing nothing, of just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear and not bothering. Sounds pretty mindful to me. He has work-life balance. Sometimes he's working getting honey. Sometimes he's chilling with his friends. He values education. He's a role model. He's compassionate and empathetic. If the person you are talking to doesn't appear to be listening, be patient. It may simply be that he has a small piece of fluff in his ear. He's also a very patient person as well, or bear. He's vulnerable, which is brave and a sign of strength. He lets people know when he's struggling. I don't feel very much like Pooh today, said Pooh. There, said Piglet. I'll bring you tea and honey until you do. He communicates. He's solution-focused. For example, when he went to save Piglet from a flood, he took an umbrella and he turned it upside down, and that's how he saved Piglet. He decides on attaching himself to a balloon to deceive the bees so he could get his honey. And he also says no one can be sad if they have a balloon. very innovative. He surrounds himself with people that honors their boundaries and provides them with support when they need it. He's a thoughtful decision maker who considers the needs of others. He admits when he makes a mistake and takes accountability. He's honest, helpful, like when he helped Eeyore find his tail. He's accountable, and he apologizes. He has gratitude and he shares it with others. And he supports his friends in the 100-acre woods like Piglet, Eeyore, and Tigger, who might have some mental health challenges. And he's also not superhuman. So I now want to be like Winnie the Pooh instead of Optimus Prime, although it would be pretty cool to morph into a truck. Winnie the Pooh is virtuous, but with a lot of the qualities that the previously mentioned heroes might not have. So if we embrace Winnie the Pooh leaders and other diverse qualities in other fellow humans, the possibilities for innovation and progress really could be endless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. That's wonderful. And I think many of us would agree that I think we all aspire to be Winnie the Pooh in a number of ways. And I look forward to engaging some of those pop culture references. So James, would you like to share with us some opening remarks about re-envisioning leadership?
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Thank you, Roxanne and Chelsea. Really incredible intervention there. And I learned a lot already. And I can't wait to continue to learn through this conversation and beyond. And I hope people online are also learning a lot as much as I do. Personally, when I think about the topic of re-envisioning leadership, I think back to my childhood. And, mostly I lived in an era when leadership had failed. And if I have to think about re-envisioning leadership, I have to think about everything that failed growing up. And that is in Sudan during the civil war that took millions of lives. And I know that somebody somewhere was not doing his or her job as a leader, right? And, I think about young children that died. I think about, women that were raped during this particular period. I think about children that did not get to live their childhood like I did. I could not live my childhood like any other child elsewhere where there is peace and there is a little bit of a backbone of a leadership, right? So when I think back to this time, I actually take the topic of re-envisioning leadership more serious because I experience it from an existential crisis level of how a failed leadership can actually affect a whole of a society, right? So mostly when I think about re-envisioning leadership, one of the key things that I actually think about is lack of empathy, right, among many leaders. And this is a result of what Roxanne was talking about people that have been failed by society or their families, how they were brought up, and some of the moral deficiencies that they had and went through systems that were also morally deficient and end up in position of power and causing mistakes that really cost lives and generations, right? So I really think that empathy is a key thing that a leader should have. And empathy when you're born into, when you are in this bubble, you end up not having the exposure that is actually required, because I actually feel that empathy is about proximity. Empathy is about being close to problems. Empathy is about being close to some of the issues, the global challenges that are happening. And when you have the power to make a decision, you will think back to some of these issues and how close you are to them, and you will make a decision that is sound, that can affect the lives of people in a more positive way as opposed to negative ways. So I think this is the kind of leader, the kind of leadership that I envision the world to have. The second aspect to that of leadership that I really like, looking back at how failed leadership affected my own life and the lives of millions of people, I also think about lack of proactiveness, more reactive leadership that has brought the world to where it is in. The First World War, the Second World War, the war that was fought in Sudan, all of that. War does not have happen overnight. There is no such thing as disasters. Even natural occurring disasters like earthquakes and all this, there are some plate tectonics that there are some earth systems that are in play, and we have not had the capacity to kind of like understand what is happening beneath us to kind of prepare for that particular disaster. So when it actually comes to issues of crisis like conflicts, civil wars, the pandemic that we are in now, they don't happen overnight. They are not disasters. These are things that have been actually happening, except that leaders have not been paying attention. And when they occur, here we are, like we say, we are in a disaster or there is a crisis. But this is something that has been simmering over time. And due to lack of proactiveness, we end up in situations that we don't want to be in. So I think when I envision a kind of leadership that our world should really embrace at this particular point in time, I think about a world where we are proactive, where we are taught to be proactive, to think through, to think beyond tomorrow, to think beyond next year, to think into 5 years, as opposed to thinking about the quarter that is coming up and how much profit we are going to make for companies, or think about the next election when it comes to political leaders. All this kind of proactive thinking. We should really move beyond reacting to events as opposed to preparing for them, right? So being proactive, I think that's the second key to the kind of leadership that I envision we should have. The third one is systems focus, that we don't exist in silos, that we don't exist in some echo chambers of groupthink that exists at the moment, which is really how the world is moving as we speak. You know, we are in small groups here and there, and we are uncomfortable to confront looking at the big picture because it is too complex for our minds to, and it may involve a lot of hard work, and we don't want to engage in a lot of hard work, the kind of leaders that we have today. So I think really having a systems approach will also enable us to move towards a world that is more interconnected and prepared to deal with some of the interconnected challenges that we are experiencing. For example, the pandemic that we are experiencing now, it's all because we did not think through systems, right? We thought that it is happening in some corner of China and it is not going to get to us. It is nothing connected to the work that we do. And here we are. So as I think about the work that I do at Rainmaker Enterprise, working with communities that don't have access to clean drinking water, I think about how that is connected to public health. I think about how that is connected to domestic violence among women, especially for women that have to maybe walk long distances to go and fetch water, and failure to that would cause conflict with their husbands at home. And if we can do something to bring an infrastructure that can supply water to these communities, we can help elevate some of these challenges that exist. That is systems thinking. And I think we can benefit off of that in the corporate sector, in the political realm, or any sector that we are thinking through. So this is a little bit of what I think we should do to re-envision the leadership as of now and into the future. Thank you, and I look forward to continuing in the other questions.
Thank you so much, James. I look forward to picking up on some of the wonderful ideas that you just presented to us about leadership. Suzette, last but not least, would you like to provide us some opening remarks, please?
I'd be profoundly happy to and honored to. It's a hard show to follow in terms of some of the conversation that's already been presented and some of the key ideas. What I'd like to do is actually circle back a little bit to some of General Dallaire's key themes around embracing humanity, engaged leadership and transformative culture change. And thinking about some of the messages that he's given us and that we've heard in various conversations, and circling that back to what that means in terms of re-envisioning leadership going forward. Echoed through General Dallaire's comments has really been envisioning transformative culture change through a charge for raising up and empowering people to take on the leadership roles that they have, similar to what has already been discussed. And Chelsea, thank you for the models that you've exemplified and captured from different sources, be that social media or from others of the speakers who have talked about role models, or where we've gotten our sense of leadership from. Lorraine for talking about leader versus leadership, the who versus the what, who the leader is. And when I think about embracing humanity, I think about the difference of being versus doing, the who of who the leader is and how the leader becomes more able to be a leader. Thinking about the role models, thinking about the compasses, the moral compasses that people embrace. And we've heard that throughout this series of people really leaning into the models of our families, of our social models, of our historical models, of models in media, and being able to really recognize those characteristics, wisdom, compassion, empathy, groundedness, that really shape a leader and enable that leader to then be able to engage with those around them, be that within their families, within their communities, within their world, taking on the leadership within a larger organization. So how that leader is shaped and how the leader, him or herself, that person, whoever that leader is also invited to embrace their own humanity. And I think, Lorraine, around the question of the successes and the failures, and just being able to embrace for a leader and who one really is, in our strengths and in our limitations, but also in the opportunity to reach our potential, to reach our ability to both exercise abilities and capabilities of a leader, the skills that are needed to be able to perform optimally, to have the knowledge to be able to exercise what that looks like, but also to be able to engage with other people in a meaningful way, to empower and uplift and recognize the talents and the gifts of those around, be that within families or within one's team or one's unit or one's community, and to really be able to take that place and space on to be able to recognize the other. Roxanne, thinking about the otherness that you invite people into, to recognize that the other, the full humanity of the other, and to recognize their ability to reach their potential and contribute in our world to a better place, that meaningful world, Lorraine, that you speak about. So there's something about embracing humanity, one's own humanity as a leader, in our strengths and our limitations, to recognize the and question, as Chelsea's brought forward, some of the characteristics or things that have informed our model of what leadership is and who we as leaders might aspire to be. So having that self-reflective kind of a component to be able to look at that. Engaged leadership, thinking about what the General has encouraged us to think about. We've heard different words for that throughout the series. Things like servant leadership, values-based leadership, perceived leadership, supportive or destructive leadership, a variety of different ways of framing and naming this. It's been something that we've grappled with historically, but also in the course of this series. We've talked a little bit about the what engaged leadership looks like in a volatile situation, or in points of war, or in military contexts, in business contexts, in civilian contexts. We've not heard too much about the complexity of what we would call a VUCA environment, where there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and the challenges that raises for a leader when a leader is in that kind of a situation, and how particularly that leader in that kind of an environment really can shape the mental health, well-being, or otherwise of the people that leader works with and leads and models for. I think within those kinds of environments, Winnie the Pooh becomes all the more important. Because Winnie the Pooh also had one other key factor that was absolutely essential, and that was the emphasis on supporting connection. And we know that a leader who models connection and support for other people really is protective in terms of mental health. There's one quote from Winnie the Pooh that I just want to bring forward because it's one of my favorites that I haven't told Chelsea about, and that's of Piglet. So this is a quote from Winnie the Pooh. Piglet sidled up to Pooh from behind. Pooh, he whispered. Yes, Piglet. Nothing, said Piglet, taking Pooh's paw. I just wanted to be sure of you. There's something about that where Pooh just needs to be present, needs to be there, needs to show up, needs to model being present and being active, being engaged, fostering connection and recognizing the importance of care and compassion and empathy that James has alluded to. So I just wanted to accentuate a little bit about that. Within the VUCA environment, the importance of being in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous space, being present, being able to admit mistakes, being able to truly foster connection and work and facilitate social supports, especially in situations that are more complex, standing up for one's team, being able to recognize service and sacrifice that the other makes, being able to empower them and call forward their gifts and their talents and letting them shine brightly. Being able to also recognize boundaries and support people when they're able to say no and to set some boundaries so that they can too take care of themselves. Overtly acknowledging and expressing gratitude. So further to what James has emphasized in terms of empathy, also that piece of saying thank you and recognizing the contribution that people make. I want to turn a little bit to transformative culture change and the way that being that leader, that beingness, as well as that doingness in those especially complex environments can really have transformative impacts, where a leader in various situations can either be supportive and uplifting of people and supportive of mental health and wellness, or they can be instruments that can potentially inadvertently or advertently cause harm. And so in those situations where we are in positions of leadership, being able to really model and make choices. And I think this is an important piece that I'd like to emphasize, is that transformative culture change requires that individuals as well as communities and units make choices. We make choices to be able to make one decision or another, exercise one choice for good or a choice in another direction. And a leader in those ambiguous positions needs to make decisions very quickly and sometimes doesn't have the opportunity or the space to make those decisions in the way that one would want. But to be able to actually take that risk and exercise one's choice with the best knowledge that one has at the moment is really critical, but mindful. And making those choices in an intentional way, in a mindful way about the impact of those choices on others that are in one's charge. Being transformative also means that we have an opportunity right now, an incredible opportunity to let the generations that are upcoming, the generations that are moving into leadership positions, to be able to shine and to really embrace their novelty, their innovation, their giftedness, to be able to make new pathways forward, to leverage the innovations and the resources, their insights, their knowledge, their energy and inspiration, and to really be able to carve out something new in our world. The General has spoken about a younger generation that is a generation without borders, that is really global, that can inspire and utilize the tools in their toolbox right now to be able to have broad reach and to be able to impact change, mobilize resources, mobilize the sensibilities of different communities, and to be able to be responsive to different situations that are occurring right now. So being transformative is looking for opportunities, is looking in places that we might not have looked before, looking for inspiration where inspiration might not have been had, for leveraging the potential of everybody and to be able to co-design our future together in a novel way. So I'll pass that back to you, Lorraine. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much to all four of you. That was really inspirational and so meaningful to hear all of that. Before we get into the second round, I just want to actually begin the second round. We received a question from the audience, and I think it's a very interesting question for all four of you, which is the participant was wondering, how can we reconcile the idea of re-envisioning leadership with role modeling? And in particular, how does role modeling promote the idea of copying existing leaders, which then perpetuates models that we already have? And so I'd like to throw that question out to all four of you about this idea of, does role modeling continue to perpetuate systems and system thinks and leadership qualities that we already have? So I don't know, not to put anyone on the spot, but would anyone like to begin? Because I think it's a really interesting question to get us started for the second round.
May I offer a thought?
Sure. Thank you, Suzette.
I'm just thinking about, I think one of the key characteristics of a leader is someone who's reflective, self-reflective, and also reflective of what's around. So I think there's a sense of being able to adopt and hold those models on one hand, and at the same time be critical and also self-reflective about what things work and what things don't work, what one aspires to, and what is needed in these different situations, in these novel times, and in these unique circumstances, because one can model someone who has lived previously in terms of characteristics, but there's also being able to translate and apply and be responsive to the current circumstance. So I think there's that importance of self-reflection and being able to be critical. Right.
Okay. So I think when I hear you, so sorry, go ahead, Chelsea, please.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think there's kind of two parts for that. One, I think role modeling isn't just being a copy or do as I say, be like me type situation. I think the person needs to create an environment, and also the system needs to create an environment where people recognize that they don't have to copy, and they feel like they don't have to copy other people, and that they can be their authentic selves, and that their qualities and characteristics can get objectives done, can get the mission done without having to be exactly like somebody else. I think that there's some, I always see on LinkedIn, they're talking about the difference between a boss and a leader. And our supervisors, our bosses, instead of thinking about being a boss, thinking about being a leader is something different. And part of that is leaving it open for people to problem solve and enter those spaces without being exactly how it was before, or perpetuating what has already been done. So I think that the right kind of leaders can role model, but still have an environment where people don't perpetuate maybe the weaknesses of that leader or the things that didn't work about that leader, and can come into their own. But I also think it's really important, as James talked to as well, that systems are set up to facilitate that and have that openness built in as well.
Roxanne, do you have any thoughts on that in regards to your comment about the bystander and the power of that second point about that group culture that can be very cohesive?
Yes, definitely. And also, if we talk about role models being individuals and systems, I think we should, if we try to narrow it down a bit more and make it less abstract, I really caught on to what James said about lack of proactiveness and morally deficient systems. So if you think about good leadership, what works within the systems we have now doesn't always necessarily work for humanity. So if you look at some of the systems that bring forward leaders of today, I think a lot has been said about what kind of leaders we would like to have, but maybe we should look at the leaders we have today within those systems and narrow down that why don't we have those leaders today? That is basically because the systems we have in place right now do not bring forward those types of individuals with those types of character traits. So narrowing it down to, for instance, two systems that we all know, the schooling system and the economic system. So if we look at the schooling system and what do we bring out in our children and what do we teach our children if they want to move on in life, is that we are creating essentially a kind of upper class of children in the schooling system that go into politics, that go into the corporate life, that are shaping our world, and they are not trained to do what is morally right. They are not trained to investigate within themselves what is morally right. They are trained to do what is legally right, what is legally correct, and how to jump through the hoops of the schooling system, of our very top university schooling system. I love this book written by a scholar named William Deresiewicz, and it's called Excellent Sheep. And this is about how we use our most excellent students all throughout the world. He focuses mainly on the Western educational system, but throughout the world, we use our most excellent students basically to become sheep, to go into a life where they are working in these big corporations or in politics and not bring their very individual morality and their own culture and their own craziness in a good way. We are then rewarding them to jump through the hoops. So they become excellent sheep. I recommend you read the book because it's very, it's thought-provoking. So if you want leaders, resourceful leaders that we need in the years ahead to topple all the topics that James and Chelsea and Suzette we talked about, or we talk about climate change, or we talk about wars that are to come, the big questions, we want children, students, young leaders to think, to develop not just expertise, but to ask questions, be creative, challenge tradition. So not the leaders we have right now that say, this is how we do it. This is how it's always been done. Shut up and join the program. No, why have you guys been doing it like this? And the leaders and the teachers and myself as well, our generation, we have to be able to say, not, guys, I'm telling you it's done this way. No, tell me, how can we make things better? So that's the schooling system. A little bit then about I don't want to talk too long because I like listening to you guys a lot more. But then if you look at the economic system, you want to make it concrete again. Right now it is built to achieve short-term goals. So you do not get complex leadership, long-term leadership, like James referred to. Now you get simple leadership. It's focused on quarterly returns. With the fixation on quarterly returns, maximizing shareholder value, you create an atmosphere of risk-taking. So if you could create a system, a leadership where big companies could embrace a broader set of stakeholders, not only shareholder value, but other stakeholders as well, the environment, customers, employees, the climate, more or less like most family companies do. Family companies came out of the financial crisis a lot better than big corporations. I think we would be better off both in terms of behavior and in terms of sustainability. So maybe focus on the systems and maybe we generate other kinds of behavior and individual leadership.
Sorry, Suzette, would you have a follow-up point?
Yeah, I was just thinking, thanks, Roxanne. I was, your comments remind me about a gentleman named Marvin Berkowitz, who writes about culture right now in terms of what we need in terms of our society. And he writes about from the educational perspective as well as a societal perspective. And he talks about the difference between moral character and performance character, and how, so those two, that polarization between moral character and performance character, and how we often lean towards helping people develop skills and knowledge, but that we don't often or are less apt to teach them about how to use those skills in a morally responsive way and responsible way. And that the shift right now in our world is really a need to give primacy to moral character. And it actually ties in with what Lorraine was talking about at first, that what our world needs right now is we can train people in performance character, but they could actually become a menace in terms of being able to exercise those tools in a direction that may not be for the betterment of our world. So they can be very, very skilled at something, but it's the who uses the what they have, if I could say that in that kind of a way, is how does someone exercise the skills and knowledge that they have in order to help foster and create the what. So do we give primacy to moral character or performance character? James?
Yeah, I think in addition to all that my fellow panelists have mentioned, I think something that I can add to answer that question is I think that the kind of leadership that we need right now will require both. We need adaptive thinking and integrative thinking to be effective leaders. Adaptive in sense that when I was talking about systems focus, we need to know that systems are dynamic and they are constantly changing, and our thinking also need to be adaptive in essence, right? And integrative thinking in a sense that combining that, like the old and the new, the information of the past that you might have gotten from your role models, or what your role models as leaders, what they did, and how can you integrate it into this new adaptive system so that you are able to operate within the current and possibly into the future, right? Finally, I also think that it's really important to know that when we talk about role models, sometimes it's actually the essence of our role models that guides us a lot more. You know, I think back to a conversation that the general and I had around, around leadership, and I asked him a question, like, at what point did you feel that you were to take the action that you took in Rwanda during the genocide? And what prompted you? What prompted you to make that decision, that hard decision? What gave you the moral courage? His response to me was, actually, it was not hard for him to make the decision that he made, because that's how he was brought up. He was brought up to, the era, the time that he was brought up in, and within the family upbringing really prepared him for that particular moment. And it was not very hard for him to make that decision. So I really think that, I think back on that, and I use that as a basis whenever I'm faced with a difficult situation and say, okay, what are some of the things that I've learned in the past, I've seen that I can fall on to deal with this particular difficult situation. So I think having role models as leaders is still critical, but we have to be adaptive and integrative in our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful to hear all of you talk about. I think what stands out to me is this tension then that you've all brought up between sort of, that often perhaps we do have leaders that want to act in a way that we would identify with or that we would be sort of proud of. But there's this tension sort of between the individual versus the system. And I've heard all of you speak to this idea. And so I just want to pose this question around, what would a morally or virtuous system or systems look like? How would we know that? How would we be able to feel that or sense that? And so I just want to pose that out to the panelists, because I think it's important that we honor this tension between the individual versus the system. Chelsea.
So I think what I think about and what's tough for me is when we talk about what a moral system looks like. What is a moral system? And again, coming back to that question of what is the greater good? And I think in a time where we had less access to information, it probably was a little more black and white. We knew this was good, that was bad, because we didn't have the information from the other side. And now when we're, bombarded with billion people's opinions with the internet, and all the information we can access is right at our fingertips, we see that this question of what is moral and what is good, it's complex. there's more than one side to the story. There's more than one perspective. We have to use our empathy. And so I don't know what the answer is to what a moral system looks like. I mean, on the surface, the easy explanation would be that it's a system that thinks about its people and does what's good for its people, causes the least amount of harm, causes the most amount of good. But again, I mean, defining what those things are, it's different to every single person and every single, even culturally and everything else. So it's a tough question.
I think so much. Thank you for that, Chelsea. I think so much too is related to, you know, the person, and then a person in a family unit, and then what is the system, and what does a moral family system look like? What does a moral community system or a unit or a team or an organization look like? And I think, you know, we hear about values and principles and what kind of guide us and where people get those principles from, and it might be from parents or from role models. So I think there's something about thinking about that in a micro, meso, macro kind of a way, and where the richness of the diversity of our communities comes also means that there needs to be a lot more opportunity for listening and inviting people into the conversation so that we can keep our eyes on a common goal, a common what that can be central for the sake of whatever this thing is that's the greater good. I don't know where that takes us, but I know that there's multiple layers of what that system looks like, and that it starts young and it goes old as we engage with whatever that system is. I also think about accountability within that and the system piece. I'm wondering, Roxanne, because it's kind of milling in my brain and I haven't thought enough about accountability, but I'm wondering, do you have thoughts in that way?
Yes, I have thought, well, not so much about accountability. Well, I have a lot of thoughts about accountability, but as to what you just say, I think in any group dynamics, whether it be family, like you just referred to, or a nation or a corporation, I think you always, as a leader and as a group, you have to search for the right balance between conformity and being able to provide freedom to deviate. So I always think of this very popular Steve Jobs campaign, which was a very, flashy commercial, which said, "This is to the crazy ones, the misfits, the outcasts," to celebrate people who dare to deviate. When in reality, when you see is corporations invest so much, and families as well, and religion as well, and universities as well, we invest so much in conformity. So looking for people that look like us, that talk like us, that dress like us. And as soon as somebody actually dares to deviate, dares to be the misfit, the crazy one, we punish them for it. So I think just overall looking at group dynamics and healthy groups, functioning groups, it is always about providing that little bit of oxygen for people to deviate and not being punished for it. If we look, for instance, at war crimes, we see that the people who dare to disobey, to break the chain of command, are the people who still sympathize with the others. So Vietnam or Nazi war crimes, the soldiers that dared to say no in participation of this were the ones that knew a local person, a translator, or had a family member that looked like the person that deviated from the group. So I think that's my only thought. Basically, it's always about finding the balance between conformity and deviance.
That's interesting. I'm mindful of what we talked about yesterday in terms of stigma and how stigma is at root of self-stigma. Can be so impactful in terms of PTSD. And I'm kind of translating that in terms of self-stigma for the leader who is maybe not conforming to what the leader in a normal organization might want to conform to, but needing to shift and re-envision what leadership in that culture might look like. I think about right now the residential schools within the Canadian context, the military sexual trauma challenges that are going on within the Canadian context, and this call for culture change, and how that necessitates a shift in the way that the leader exercises leadership, that breaks away a little bit from the fabric or the fiber of what that organization might need in order to be able to do a little bit of a shift. And just thinking about that self-stigma that leader would have to face in order to be able to stand up and make a difference, to step outside of the mold. And that's a hard spot to be in. And that goes back to, I think, what Lorraine was alluding to in terms of the character and the wisdom and the prudence and being able to step outside of what would be normative.
James, I saw you nodding, so I just want to give you a moment. Would you like to comment on that before we begin to wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, if there is something I can add to the discussion around like systems, the tensions in between, I actually think that when we move our society towards systems thinking, it will not be awkward. We wouldn't have deviant. We wouldn't have outliers or like people that are, because essentially like systems thinking allows us to question, right? To make questioning normal, to say, why have we been doing this like the way we are doing it for this period of time? Like, why is this like that? Like, why is it that, you know, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, or when we talk about, for example, the incident that happened in the States where, you know, all of a sudden it seemed like there was awareness about Black issues or people of color issues because of George Floyd. But this is something that has been there. Like some people were like woken up, like all of a sudden. That should never be. Like it should never be that we wait until an example of a human being or a system has failed like terribly, that it has turned into a crisis in order for all of us to give us the capacity to question, you know, to question why we don't have inclusion in the boardrooms, to question why women are paid like differently, or to question why, you know, when it comes to international governance and all this, like why decisions are made in the West and implemented in places like Africa. You know, we should be able to incorporate this into our systems. The system should enable us to actually question, each one of us to be able to question, that we don't wait on the leader, actually, that we are all leaders and we can question any aspect of the system that is not working properly. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you on answering my incredible question. That was just incredible answers to it. So bearing in mind time, normally we would at this point ask each of the panelists to give a sort of a summary of their takeaway, or, you know, kind of the most important point that they wish to leave with. But we've also received a question, and this goes back to Roxanne, but this is now going to be for everyone, which is the participant asks, it says that your essay ends with the question, what do you do now? And so the question is, you know, would each of the speakers be able to answer, what are you doing in your own life to support leadership? And so perhaps that's a fitting way to end this conversation today. So I'm going to go in reverse. Suzette, would you like to start us off with what are you doing now to support you being a leader, your own leadership?
I think supporting my own is learning ravenously from other people how to be a leader, looking at what ways I can also engage other leaders to look at how we can cultivate and support leadership development and growth in experiential, integrated, novel ways, so that we can hear voices and co-design that. So looking at that in my own world, but also in my own leadership, but also looking at how to inspire and uplift and prepare leaders so that it becomes integrated in everything we do, everything that we are, every choice we make going forward and exercise our beingness in our doingness, and being the leaders, exercising leadership around us. So I think that way. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. James, I'll put you on the spot. So what is your own role as a leader or leadership?
Well, on my end, I think, what to do now, or what do you do now? I think, like, in my line of work as a humanitarian, and as an innovator, it's about being unafraid to step forward, even when everyone else is not. And essentially at the center of whatever you do, bringing everyone along and leaving no one behind. It's very important, especially within the area that we're working in. For example, like, our work focus heavily within South Sudan, a country that has undergone like years of conflicts that have turned the country and its people upside down, literally. For example, in 2 years ago, we had an incident where a group of young girls were being forced into child marriage. And I mobilized thoughtful people to act, and we were able to bring out 4 young girls and put them in school to learn. And every day I learn from them, from the power that they have, and what the world doesn't know what is going to hit them when these girls are recognized. So really recognizing talents that are hidden, and stepping forward when others are taking backstage really is what I think we should do now. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Chelsea.
So lately I've been reflecting on kind of a micro scale, what I can do to help the leaders of tomorrow. And I think the first thing that I think about is I need to be a role model. And I think about when girls and women have told me, hey, that's so cool what you're doing, I'd like to do that. I kind of cringe a little bit, and a part of me goes, oh my goodness, please don't want to be like me. I'm reading a book right now about burnout in the millennial culture. And I guess they're starting to call millennials the burnout generation. And I think that it's really important that we're setting a good example for the youth, the people that are coming next and are going to be the future leaders, that our workaholic culture isn't necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily necessary to be a leader. And maybe leading with balance, taking care of your own health and well-being, that's not only going to make for better leaders that can serve for a longer period of time, but it's also going to make it so that we aren't burning out those future upcoming leaders or the people in the middle. So I think myself, I'm trying to find some balance and be a role model and be proud of what I'm putting out to the world. So when a girl goes, cool, I would like to go to school or do what you do, I can go, yeah, you should. It's awesome. So that's my goal. The other half of that is with the question, what do you do now? And Suzette talked about the it and versus the do and the doing. The Deloitte 2011 paper actually has some points on what to do to be an inclusive leader and to role model and inspire future leaders. And some of those points are creating an environment which is open, championing diversity and drive initiatives by being actively involved in them, collaborative leadership style, seek out and value employees' contributions, show gratitude, create a sense of collective identity and shared goals within a team, but also to what Roxanne said, we don't want to create conformity in a vacuum either. Possess cultural competency and have the ability to actively manage conflict. So those are some of the things that I think people can do and put into practice to be better leaders, and not just in the corporate world, but in other industries as well. And I'd like to add that I think a good leader is vulnerable, authentic, and honest. And those are things I'm also aspiring to be myself. And again, hopefully the systems can create the room for people to do that as well.
Thank you, Chelsea. And again, Roxanne, we'll let you finish up our discussion today.
What a great discussion. And I was so, I learned so much from the other panelists. So thank you for that. And for me, what do you do today? I think it is always focusing on my two main interests. I mean, you have to be very much interested in some things and then try to explore what you can do. And for me, it's always about studying the system and studying the self. So yesterday there were some young women who came up to me after a lecture and said, you know, what books would you recommend reading? So I thought about that question and I said, surround yourself with people that disagree with you. So read the books of the authors that turn you off and of the topics that maybe you think, you know, I know everything about that and I disagree with those people, so I will not read them. So I'm always interested in, if you want to know how to be good, first, for me, always is focus on the bad. So for instance, today, because I spoke to those girls, I was looking at Machiavelli again, Il Principe, the ruler, you know, the handbook of Stalin and all the dictators that we do not want to repeat themselves in the future. But reading Machiavelli for me is also knowing if that is the handbook towards dictatorship, then I also know what the alternatives maybe can be. And to get my own mind going on that. But then again, also always being aware that the system, especially the system that my children are now growing up in, they're 3 teenagers, this system promotes conformity. This system does not promote deviation. So not being naive about that and recognizing that our political leaders today and a lot of leaders in our economical field are maybe not so open to the answers towards the questions that we are asking here today. So not being naive and at the same time being very optimistic, especially about the generation of my children.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists for your wonderful words of advice and guidance and wisdom and prudence and courage today. And I will end as the moderator and turn it back to Eric, who can close our session for today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorraine. And what a pleasure to listen into this panel as a host. And what a rich conversation. And I was touched by you James, you were the one that said, I grew up in a situation of failed leadership. And that really touched me. And you explored that, how we can be proactive and learn from a systems model and then beyond. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think there is a great opportunity to re-listen into this panel afterwards. It's live streamed, but it can be viewed later. Thank you so much, Lorraine, for taking on this job as a moderator. You steered this panel to give the excellence that it needed to have, and thank you for your opening remarks. They're really thoughtful and carry great wisdom. So thank you for doing that. And also on my behalf, Suzette, you're my co-host here, and thank you for serving on this panel with your wisdom and intellect, and thank you for stepping in on the last minute. I really appreciate that. And Chelsea, I remember Winnie the Pooh now forever and thinking back of you. And not only that, but many other things, but it was a beautiful art pop memory that you share with us. Yeah, thank you for the person who asked this question. What do you do? Because Roxanne, that was really the last question of your book, and it was now populated with some answers by yourself as well. So it was nice to listen. And again, on behalf of me, now I have a few last comments. And of course, this is session number 7, and we have much to think about. In closing, I would like to remind everybody that is still listening in that we have one final session in this series planned, which is for November 10. And after today, I learned that we in Canada, or the people in Canada, can wear poppies because that's Remembrance Day. And that version, or that session, will focus on the pathway forward. We know that this is a very important day for veterans, November 10, and their families, as well as the whole world, as we will pause to remember sacrifices that were made and honor those who had served in the forces. We have a very, very special panel for that day too. And the panelists will include, and I'll give them their names with you now, it is Senator Murray Sinclair. And Murray Sinclair is a former member of the Canadian Senate and a First Nation lawyer who served as a chairman of the Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission from 2009 to 2015. And Suzette already alluded to that, is a very difficult situation currently very on the radar and the forefront in Canada. Dr. Stephanie Belanger, who is a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada, an associate scientific director of the Canadian Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research, and a Royal Canadian Navy reservist. She will be with us too. Professor James Orbinski is a physician, and he is a humanitarian activist, an author and leading scholar in global health and director of the Dalladé Institute for Global Health Research at York University. And we're very pleased that General Retired Romeo Dallaire, the former Canadian Senator and Lieutenant General, holder of the 2021 Cleveringa Chair at Leiden University, will also then be with us. And Suzette, some last word, and then I'll take it over to close.
Yeah, the conversation for the November 10th, we're going to be honored with the moderation by Professor Dr. Tom Leifart, who's Vice Dean and UNICEF Chair in Children's Rights at Leiden Law School. So we're welcoming him in that role. Eric, back to you.
Yeah, and he also shares with us keynote reflections.
Absolutely.
Now, please let me emphasize the following. The final critical conversation will deepen the discussion about embracing humanity, engaged leadership, and transformative culture change. This will be the final session, leveraging General Dallaire's Cleveringa Professorship, which has focused on the topic of moral courage. We've had a wealth of renowned international speakers and experts join us, ranging from UN representatives, military leaders, lawyers, advocates, clinicians, and scholars from a range of countries. It has truly been a wonderful and a rich experience, and I was delighted to set it up with Suzette and the Dallaire Institute. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you on November 10th. And thank you, panelists, and thank you, Lorraine, for joining with us tonight.